Hello everyone and welcome back to Mark on Motoring. In the previous video instalment we went on a little bit of a trip to see fellow Renault enthusiast Joe. Now Joe happened to be breaking a Megane Coupe very much like my own, for which I went up to see him about collecting some parts for. While I was there we also had a bit of a chat and a tour of a few of the vehicles that are currently on his fleet, like this 1.6e Sport. And another one which just so happened to be an F7R 2-litre 16 valve, the coupe that I've always wanted to have a drive in. Joe kindly handed over the keys to me and I took the car out for a quick spin. But unfortunately it can't all be fun and games on this channel, and now I'm back at home and the real work begins. Now we left off where we'd had a ride up to Joe to collect some parts for the Megane Coupe, and obviously I had to go in that magnificent F7R of his. But now the real work must begin, unfortunately, and the first job I need to start with is preparing to replace the heater matrix, which I've been putting off for over 12 months now. It's not a particularly pleasant job because it looks like a lot of the dashboard is going to have to come out to get to it. But before I can even do that, we're going to have to do a coolant flush on this car yet again. Because these have a cast iron block, no matter how many times you flush them, you still tend to get corrosion coming through. When I actually bought the car, I actually did some videos like this, and I actually replaced this radiator with a new one, flushed out all the old coolant, new hoses, and initially the coolant did stay pink, but eventually went back brown again. Another thing is, even though it will run on this pink coolant, Renault's used to always run on green coolant, so I've actually been and bought some of that as well. But before I can do any of that, I do need to disconnect the battery, so we'll do that first off. Because the battery on these is positioned in quite an awkward spot, where it's sort of right beneath the windscreen. There is a little flap here though that does pop up, so if you do need to ever get the battery out, you can do so fairly easily. Hopefully we shouldn't have to do that today though. Just a case of removing the negative terminal there, and we should be good to go. As is often the case, there are certain things in the way which we're going to have to remove before we can proceed. So it's looking like I'm going to have to remove this air filter box in order to get to the bottom of this radiator hose. It's actually about 3 years since I initially had this car in bits. I did have the car off the road for about 6 months when I first purchased it, when I did quite a bit of work under here. I did actually do a fair few videos at the time of me doing various jobs on this car, but I must admit I'm not really all that comfortable doing these sorts of videos for a couple of reasons. One being, as you may have already overheard, there's traffic and people passing by and things. I don't have a garage to work in, and I'm actually out on my driveway doing this. So that's not ideal. Quite often you'll get disturbed part way through doing things. It also obviously means I've got camera equipment outside as well. And the final reason is I'm not really a trained mechanic. I'll have a go at a few jobs, but I wouldn't say jobs like this do require a bit of thought, and obviously trying to concentrate on what I'm doing and obviously film at the same time, it doesn't make the job any easier. Looks like I'm not going to be able to remove this air canister in one piece. See, and already we're having to sort of undertake things that I hadn't anticipated doing. I think this is going to be a very long-winded job. I dare say you can probably get to this without taking this other part off, but there's a guide at the back. You sort of slide this air filter housing up through. And well, this is all still connected up. I seem to be struggling to unclip everything. There we go. Of course, the good thing with these cars is once you do start taking away a few of these parts like the air filter, there's actually quite good access to most things under here. So we found us bottom radiator hose, which is probably going to be the easiest point on this to actually drain this system. Right, here goes nothing. Obviously coolant you really want to be containing and disposing of properly. Of course that's easier said than done. This is probably going to run out everywhere under here. Saying about what great access there is, I can't actually see what I'm doing here. I really don't envy people on these channels that buy and sell a lot of cars and have to do numerous repairs. It's coming. Oh, there she blows. Just loosen that cap, hopefully that'll let, there we go, that'll let some of the air out so it'll flow a bit quicker. Because we're going to have to put the hose through here to try and clear a lot of this out, and obviously there's still coolant that's sat in the radiator as well. Now because I'm putting a different kind of coolant, I want to make sure I do thoroughly flush everywhere here. I don't want to risk mixing the two kinds of coolant, so we'll have to make sure we can get in good access everywhere with the hose. One thing I did last time around when I replaced these hoses is all the old clips I replaced with Jubilee clips. So no special tools required. We've got an old container here that we can use to contain some of these old fluids. Give everything here a good hose down because antifreeze can be quite sweet and obviously be tempting for animals to come and start licking this, and it probably wouldn't do them a lot of good. It'll take a while to get this running clear, so we'll whip off those hoses there as well. In fact, yeah, I'll make sure I go through the hoses to the heater matrix as well. Even though I'm replacing the matrix, we do want to make sure all the hoses are clear so we haven't got any traces of this coolant left. Oh. Well, that's all of the coolant drained out finally. That's all been flushed as well. I didn't film the entirety of it because trying to get all that clean was quite a laborious task, and you really didn't want to see all of that. We are starting to lose the light now as well. I'm going to make a start on removing this dashboard because again I think this is going to be quite a long-winded job. but I expect I am probably going to have to pick this up again in the morning. We are also due some more rain again from tomorrow afternoon, so yeah, I think we're going to struggle a bit here, but we'll crack on and do the best we can. I have had a look at the Haynes manual. Probably confused myself even more than I already was. The problem within the Haynes manual is that I looked at the section for doing the heater matrix, which then refers you to another section for removing the heater controls, which then directs you to another chapter about removing the fascia. And removing the fascia, that chapter seems to talk just as much about removing the seats, removing jacking the car up, removing wheel arch liners so that you can access the wiring loom. It seems more aimed at a full complete strip down. That's obviously not what I want to do. I only want to remove the bare minimum that I need to do to access the parts of the vehicle that I need, which is basically down here behind this radio and these heater controls. This lower centre console is also going to have to come out. Now, I know from doing a previous job on here near enough 3 years ago that to remove the dash top you have to remove the speaker grills, so they just popped out easily with a trim tool. And then we've got a couple of torque screws here as well up on top of the dash. Once we've undone those, this dash top should slide off. Hopefully that'll make things a little bit easier to see. Right, moment of truth. One piece out. Sadly, I think the rest is probably going to be a little bit more challenging. Right, so I can see we've got a couple of big bolts here at the back of this dash panel. Hopefully they'll come away easy enough. Might even have to think about labelling up some of this wiring to make sure we don't mix anything up, because heaven forbid we want to make sure that when we put this all back together we can plug everything in where it's supposed to be. That's the real question will be, is will I be able to just remove this centre console and a few of the items that are in the dash here, or am I going to have to remove all the lower dash? I've got a bad feeling it's possibly going to be the latter. So there's a good reason why I've not been looking forward to this job, why I've been putting this off for the past 12 months. Well, I think I'm going to be fumbling around blindly for quite a while with this one, so I think we will wrap this one up until the morning, and I'll catch up with you when I've done a little bit more. Right, time we started labelling some of these connectors, I think. So in reality, I possibly didn't actually need to bother labelling all the block connectors. After all, they are predominantly of a unique fit, so I think you really would struggle to actually fit them in the wrong place. That said, there are rather a lot of them, and I really didn't want the hiccup of trying to figure out where things went if the loom had got dislodged throughout this process. Obviously there is a big thick chunk of wires that runs along the underside of the dashboard, the full width of the car. I did then progress on to undoing the torque screws that hold in the radio and clock display and the instrument cluster. Then it was on to the dashboard, which is retained by 4 bolts on either end of the dash. Once those were out of the way, I then made a start on the steering column, but by this point I really wasn't feeling very well. My headache wasn't clearing, and I was really sort of starting to feel beaten by this. I actually got to the point where I retired for the afternoon, did actually make a few inquiries about possibly getting someone to come and take this job over. I was at a point where I really were regretting having started this job, and I was seriously considering actually just putting the car back together and filling up the coolant and changing the oil and calling it a day. This really was the lowest point that I was at through the process of doing this job. So we're now into day 3 of me attempting to do this heater matrix. I actually ended up switching off the cameras, and I got in a bit of a state with this yesterday. Didn't feel that well, to be honest, as well. I had a banging headache, sort of been crunched up in the footwell of the car. I think that was probably partly down to the stress of doing this, but also an old whiplash injury that I got over a decade ago, and being sort of upside down, cramped up, contorting myself certainly doesn't help. So where we managed to get to, I've got the dashboard unbolted. There's a lot of wiring actually clipped around the back of the dashboard in various places, including wiring for vehicles with equipment that's not actually in this particular car. And yeah, people talk about French cars, saying they're perhaps not the best built, but they certainly went to town with this one. There was no expense spared when it came to various fixings and clips and things. But I've come to the conclusion I'm going to have to bite the bullet, and the steering wheel is going to have to come off. I was hoping I'd be able to just unbolt the dash, lift it up out of the way and access where I needed to get. That's clearly not going to be the case. This steering wheel has also got an airbag, and this is something I really didn't want to have to mess about with. Obviously I've turned to YouTube and forums and things to try and get some advice. I've actually seen someone do one on a Mark II Phase 1 Clio, which was a little bit later than this car, but not much, and it looks very similar. One of the problems I've had is the battery is disconnected on the vehicle and has been for about 3 days, but the Haynes manual actually suggests that you remove a fuse just to ensure, just in case there's any power still in the system there, to make sure that the bag won't go off when you come to remove it. Looked in my fuse box, nothing like the one in the Haynes manual, so yeah, some good that's done me. I've just watched somebody on YouTube do one, as I say, though, in a Clio. The job did look quite simple, but to my horror, I noticed in the background the immobiliser light was still flashing, so they've obviously done that with the system still alive. If I can find a clip on YouTube, I'm actually going to insert one of showing you just the power in one of these airbags. I've seen sort of shorts clips of people basically putting airbags out of cars under office chairs, sitting on the chair and basically detonating the airbag for fun. Yeah, it's not something you really want to mess around with. So we're going to have a go now at undoing the back of this wheel here. That should release the airbag squab, and then I'll have to disconnect it from behind. Well, let's hope I don't get blown to smithereens. I'm feeling a lot safer now, though. Here goes. There we have it, one airbag. Oh, what a sigh of relief. Right, so next thing to undo the steering wheel. Obviously we've disconnected the horn push buttons as well. This is something else with this earlier Phase 1. Other Phase 1 vehicles I've seen don't have the horn push on the steering wheel. They actually have them on the stalk. So yeah, finding a replacement steering wheel for these ones to wear like this one is starting to really difficult. So obviously, as expected, actually that's not too bad, that came away quite easy. Always leave the nut on slightly, because if you have to really sort of knock them hard, you can end up with the wheel flying off and hitting you. Let's get this bolt out as well. I'm just going to see if there's space in here to mark the position of the wheel. Hopefully that way when we come to put the steering wheel back, we'll end up with it in the correct place. My trusty old marker pen. Make sure the wheels are as central as possible at least. Hopefully that way I'll have a fighting chance of getting this back on in the right place. Well, that's another piece down. So it looks like this radio remote is actually wired without a connector on here, so it looks like I'm going to have to actually remove this from the column, and hopefully this, now that I've taken the bolt out of the bottom of here, these parts should just pull straight away from the column. Hopefully then we might be able to have half a chance at getting this dashboard out. Voila. Well, I think this is still going to be a tight squeeze. To those of you who've never owned a French car and may think that they're quite poorly built, well, take a look in here and you'll see the extremes I've had to go to just to try and access this heater matrix. Obviously there are wires and things in here that are so tightly packed in behind the dashboard, like in a little cavity between the top of the glove box and the bottom of the shelf in here, where you couldn't possibly get in there to unclip the wire. Some of those wires are to do with passenger airbag. The other thing, OBD port as well down here. The car does have an OBD port, but it's not OBD2 compatible. But it's down here with the fuse box, but it's separate to the fuse box, and it's on a rather than having a block connector on the back, it's got a wire to it, and it seems to be bonded to the dashboard, so I'm not sure how I would actually get that separated to fully remove the dashboard. Oh, anyway, pressing on. So we're now into day 4 of attempting to do a heater matrix. Again, I've had to do quite a bit off camera purely because, well, it's just the complexity of this job. One thing I had underestimated is how much work needs to be done, not just in the car but also under the bonnet. So I didn't see why I would have to remove the strut brace, for example, or why I would have to remove the brake fluid reservoir, or the mass airflow meter sensor, or the air intake inlet, but all of them did have to come out. I then had to remove the trim under the bonnet, the rubber trim. I then had to remove a rubber seal from under the bonnet that sits around the battery tray under the windscreen, various parts of plastic trim from below the windscreen. I also had to undo a black metal bulkhead. Once the bulkhead was removed, I then had better access to get to the blower motor assembly. Some of the bolts were still a bit of a pig to get to, in all honesty, and don't even get me started on the horrors that I found under there. I think there's dirt that's been accumulated over the past 27 years with it being somewhere that's not easily accessible, but alas, I managed to get all that out of the way, which gave me access to the one bolt that holds the heating distribution box in place. So now we're actually in a position where I can actually get at the heater matrix, and it looks like I'm going to be able to swap this one part that I've been trying to do for the past 4 days. Oh, thank goodness. Whoa. find ourselves now at day 5 where I can finally start reassembling the car. Though most of the plastics and things have aged exceptionally well, there's a lot of cabling that had sort of sponge around it and various parts behind the dash, and a lot of that has degraded over the years. So once that was vacuumed, it was time to break out the manual to find some of the torque settings for the steering column and also for the steering wheel. I know a lot of mechanics probably just do this sort of thing by feel, but I must admit there is something very satisfying about the click of a torque wrench and knowing that a bolt has been tightened precisely to the setting that it should be. Of course, it also reduces the risk of a novice like myself from over-tightening the bolt and stripping it in the process. So here I've just applied a little bit of Loctite to the steering wheel bolt. Obviously the cabling for the airbag and the horn pusher threaded back through the steering wheel, and the steering wheel put back into place, lined up as best I can with the markers I made earlier. All being well, this will all line up perfectly so that when we're driving down the road in a straight line, the wheel should line up as we would hope it to do so. The bolt has firstly been tightened by hand. You'll see we've got an extension bar there with a torque socket on. So initially just tightening by hand, and then I'll bring in the torque wrench just for the final tightening of the bolt. So once that's done, we're back to the fun part again. We plug in the horn, and then it'll be time to bring back the airbag squab in. So just the exact reverse of what we did earlier in the video. So the little plug connector just plugs straight back into the back of there, and place the squab back in the centre of the steering wheel. And this time it's an even smaller torque wrench. Something I've noticed with torque wrenches is generally the smaller the torque wrench, the more expensive they tend to be. This small one I'm using here can do some really low values, and I actually bought that for working on mountain bikes. Day 6, we've finally got everything back in place after several attempts at putting the dashboard back and trying not to trap all the wires in the process. At this point I've refilled the coolant and I've been busy bleeding the system. I've had the engine running while I've done that, and obviously I've been squeezing the hoses and things to try and get the coolant to pull through and then get pumped around the engine. So I've tightened up the bleed screws and everything there. The car is now running up to temperature as we would hope it to do. So the good news is, for the first time we actually have heat, and I mean a lot of heat coming through now, so that's really good. One problem I am having though, I think possibly when I've put this heater box back together, the heater selector, it's just not directing airflow to the windscreen. Cables, I didn't even disconnect the cables, but for some reason it feels slack, as if when I turn it round, as if it's not under load properly. So that must be some issue with where I've reinstalled the heater box. With how many, not even hours but days it's taken me to do this, at the moment that's just not a priority for me, so maybe that's something I'll come back to at a much later date. But thankfully everything else seems to be working, so next job I think we'll shut it down and we'll drop the oil. Now on to what is generally quite a simple task, doing the oil change. I've actually done videos on this before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but obviously there we're just undoing the sump plug to drain out the oil. Seems no matter how many times I do this, I never seem to learn how to do it without making at least some mess. Opening the top cap just to relieve air pressure so the oil can flow out a bit more freely, not that it seemed to be having any problem. I've actually put a new sump plug in this time as well, and of course a new sump plug copper washer. Again, I'll be tightening that up to the correct torque setting. Again, always a bit of a faff because I really could do with buying a set of deep sockets to go over the sump plug key. but who knows, maybe next year. So once everything's cleaned off and the car's lowered down, I then attempt to remove the oil filter. Now again, even though this was only put on sort of hand tight last year, the oil filter removal tool I've got just doesn't seem to be doing the job very well, and off camera I did resort to the one thing that you should probably never do: screwdriver straight through the side of it to try and pry it off. But our new genuine Renault oil filter there, we've pre-filled with a little bit of oil and obviously smeared a little bit around the rubber gasket as well, so that should give us a nice seal and some fresh oils going into the top of the engine there through the oil filler. So we'll fire her up again just to make sure everything's working as it should be, and I think we can call that a success. After a gruelling week of doing this heater matrix replacement, the car's looking something like back together. There's a few little bits I still need to do before it goes back on the road, but I've actually got a little over a week until the end of the month anyway. Although that said, it's a glorious day today, and it would be quite tempting to tax it and go and drive it, having just done the coolant and the oil and filter change as well. I say incredibly, we do seem to have a heater in the car now as well, which is great. Still a few little issues like that heater distribution, but again, that's just a job I don't want to get into at this moment in time. But a few little sort of trim items and things that I'm looking to do, so weather permitting I'll try and get that done before the end of the month. But yeah, really looking forward to getting this car back on the road. Finally into May, taxed the car only a week or so until Rustival, so I've took the car on a few 100-mile shakedown run. Here I'm on the Buttertubs Pass, which you can actually see more of in my Raid Tan Hill video from a few weeks ago. At the start of my previous video I remarked on the joys of getting older, but when I'm back in this car I feel like the teenager that grew up and got everything he ever wanted. Hopefully I'll see some of you at Rustival, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future videos.